when your self-concept is not tied into any sort of physical reality, you can decide that a different form works for you much better than the one that you had before, like trying on a new coat in some ways. And everybody's kind of allowed to be sort of a shapeshifter inside the headspace. It's like it's their self-concept. They get to play with it and discover that, oh, well, that really did work for me until I found this other thing.
It's so weird to do intro stuff right now, but welcome back to part 2 of Selves-Concepts.
Hello.
Hi.
Happy time zone, everybody.
Happy times on
Yeah.
Happy times on every many.
It's good to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
It's I don't know how long it's been for you guys, but for us it's been no time at all.
No time, well, the bit of time that I needed to sort out my recording file here. But yeah. We will dive right back into it, I would say. Just go for it.
Okay. So, yeah, before we were just starting to talk about how self-concepts are, different for plural people, but they start out as being based on what people you'd expect to find in singular embodied people. At least that's our experience. It's like, where do you start? Well, you start with thinking that how you thought things were is how they were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so, yeah, then you get into deep stuff like, oh, well, what if your body doesn't matter in the self-concept, and who would you be without a body at all is a question. So, because, yeah, we contemplate that a lot because some of us are, deal with the fact that we're embodied. We don't hold self-concepts in the body. So,
Also, like, I think for us it goes back to the question, what is consciousness actually?
mm-hmm.
Like, that's the stuff I think we thought of first when we were like teenagers. Was, you start to think about, what is that thing that is actually thinking and feeling. And that brought us more into like the realm of lucid dreaming and stuff, like when you can experience dreams almost, or actually exactly like you perceive the physical reality around you, then what's the difference? And stuff like that.
Oh,
Yeah, I just get reminded of my headmates that this is stuff for next episode.
that's okay.
Not this one.
It does touch in all the way.
Yeah. It's all related, yeah.
And apparently that little's gone now. But nice to see you. I'm glad you came by.
Yes.
Yes. It was like, yeah, they don't care about the difference between dreams and reality. They just wanted to talk about how funny it is to be little in an old body. But yeah, it's like, so for us, we have to be careful about the dream stuff because if yeah, we used to be, I guess it was pre-recent discovery. Some of our headmates would still be kind of dreaming when we were awake, and it was a problem. So we have to be, as far as that goes back into self-concept stuff, is we have to be really aware of headmates that don't think of themselves as embodied at all, can't make decisions for the body. They don't understand embodiment enough for their feedback to be taken on at face value rather than just kind of an opinion.
Mm.
I don't know. It seems disrespectful in some ways, but like, no, it's something that we actually have to do. Just like we know some systems kind of get themselves into trouble when their headmates identify as as if having had embodied experiences that their body has not had. Like, headmates of, say, a different race than the body is the one where it becomes particularly problematic.
Mm.
Because it's like, no, you have to recognize that you do not have embodied experience with these things, no matter what systemic experience you may have. And just, it gets tricky, having um, having selves and self-concepts that very much differ from how the body is perceived by people on the outside.
Mm. And I think that ties a bit in the embodiment stuff that we talked before in the previous episode. That like there's a big difference about like being identifiable from the outside and like how you conceptualize your self-concepts internally. Like there's a big dissonance, and that's very apparent mostly for plurals. Not always. Sometimes that may be difficult to detect if you're not if you never hear about plurality, if you're not taught, nobody teaches you these things, right?
Right.
It's just you stumble into this experience somehow, and not sure where I'm going with this thought, but
that's okay.
I'll just leave it to you.
Well, I know it's not what you were saying, but it did remind us that plurality is also a really big umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of systems that are absolutely nothing like each other, but they're still valid as systems. They're still, it's like your self-concepts are valid. There's like no one else has any say over, how you see yourself. That's not up to anybody. Your headmates can have thoughts and feelings about it's like we have some headmates that cause controversy in the system just by the nature of who they are, like say interjects of abusers, for example. It's like that's incredibly problematic to have around the headspace, and trolls too. Like it's tough. Like the troll chorus in our system is it's tricky to deal with them. But that doesn't mean that that's not who they are, and it doesn't mean that just because we gosh, I don't know, we're trying to be diplomatic here. But some of their job is to be a pain in the butt. It is their job to be in the way of what we're trying to do. And, we're trying to keep rational about them and try to be like, okay, we know you're just doing your job. How do we, one, get more of what we want out of life, even though the troll chorus is still here? Like, how do we, somebody in there is like, well, we teach them to sing. That's the first thing we do. Because it's just, being heckled is so much gentler when it's in song, I guess. But yeah, I suppose we probably never mentioned the troll chorus, right?
I think you mentioned them to us before, but not here on this podcast.
No, not at all. But it's kind of like when people talk about the inner critic. That's one of the manifestations of how we experience that concept of an inner critic is literal like hecklers in our headspace who watch what's going on in the front and have comments about it, and it has different flavors. There's not always the same members of the troll chorus, but but they were doing some things that were making it hard to function, like being such a big distraction that it was hard to focus. Like they know they have to be quiet when we're driving, right? It's like because they like having a body to live in. If we do something terrible to the body, they don't get to be themselves anymore. That's a hard conversation we've had to have a lot with our headmates. It's like, okay, guys, I know you just want to be yourselves, and I know you just want to express yourself, and I know you want to be heard. But if we don't take turns and put things in the time and the place that works best for the system, rather than just your personal impulses, then we don't get anywhere, or we get set backwards and all of us get less of what we want rather than building more and more of what we want. I mean, that's kind of what working together looks like, right? And that's what comes up when you find out that you have all these self states. It's like, oh my gosh, how do we organize ourselves into a life that actually works being expressed through one body together?
Yeah.
And the truth is, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But we find that that's just life anyway. I mean, we're in a family. We live with other people, so we do get to practice some of the things that we try as experiments in the headspace and see how they work embodied, right?
Mm.
Through relationship with other people.
And I think what you mentioned before, that like reminded me also about this is Will, by the way. I switched in
Hi.
while you were talking.
You did, didn't you?
Because this resonates so much with one of my experiences where like you mentioned the inner critic, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I guess such a, I don't know, ugly feeling whenever people talk about inner critic or the saboteur. Do you say that? Saboteur?
Yeah. Saboteur, yeah.
Saboteurs in your mind, like singular people talking about this, right? Like these kind of concepts of parts and
Yeah.
like having the inner demons and all this kind of this terminology is
And we're going to interject just a
yeah.
tiny bit about the demon bit, because it's like, well, see, while we grown, because we don't systemically, we don't all want to be referred to as demons and know how problematic it can be, but at the same time, some people in our system own it, right?
Mm.
We have several headmates that own it's like, fine, if I'm an inner demon, this is what I'm like as a demon. And, so it's like demon headmates are not unheard of. And of course, they're not unheard of when so many, especially religious takes on plurality, has been, well, this is just the devil you're possessed by demons. And like, okay, well, no, we're not. But it doesn't mean that a headmate might not adopt that model that you presented for them as a allowance of existence in your eyes. It's like, fine, if I have to exist as a demon and you'll still let me exist, then maybe I will do that.
Mm.
And it's not that their idea of demons in the body made that person, that headmate, exist. It's that sometimes, yeah, I don't know. I guess we won't say that out loud.
It's all right. But what I was going to say was that often it gets talked about like as if that's a separate part of you or a part that needs to be like go away or needs to be suppressed or ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Often I hear this so often, things like, oh, that's your inner critic talking, don't listen to them. And I have such a, I don't know how to call it. I don't know what adjective I should put on to this feeling I have. But I have a reaction to that, and that is not positive. And it's like,
We are nodding. Yeah.
because so in those terms, I would be the inner critic. I would be that voice of reason that is just holding us collectively back or whatever, And if my handmaids would have bought into that kind of narrative, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here talking on this podcast with my own voice. And I'm just so grateful for my handmaids that they didn't buy into this kind of narrative. That they were like, no, let's just be kind. Let's just be open. Let's just be curious. Let's just listen to what this voice has to say, you know, and where these feelings are coming from, this and that. Like, they didn't really know about plurality. Like, back then we thought of it more like parts of one person doing parts work stuff. But yeah, now I get always sad. Sad, I don't know if this is the right word, but I feel for all these inner critics and saboteurs or whatever, because they might be undiscovered headmates, you know, and I feel for them in a way. Like, I hope one day you will have your own voice and you will be able to speak up, you know, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we've discovered, the tool we use now, instead of that whole silence them kind of thing or ignore them kind of thing, is to acknowledge them, sure, but keep perspective when you do so. You know, it's like, what are they actually trying to do? What are they trying, you know, if they're being protective, what are they protecting you from? And is that a historic thing you needed to be protected from, or is this a current thing? You know, are they running on an outdated protocol? And if they're running on an outdated protocol, like, well, how do we bring them to the now? You know, it's like, okay, I can see why you really needed to protect us from bullies doing this certain thing at that certain time, but like, we're grown-ups now. So, well, while the people around us might not behave like grown-ups, a lot of times it doesn't mean that we have to behave like their behavior's okay. You know, we have a lot more tools, and it's like, you know, so we start sharing toolboxes instead, you know. And when, like, our son, our life son, was having a really hard time with inner critics recently, and via, you know, us having such good relationships, honestly, with each other in our headspace, we were able to tell him, it's like, hey, are you, you know, are you getting kind of beat up by the trolls in your brain, right? I use your inner critic really getting to you. And yeah, he nods because he loses the ability to speak sometimes. And they're like, hey, you know. So I was like, I bet what they're saying has a grain of truth in it, or you'd be able to be kind of dismissive of what they're saying, right? So there is a point to what they're saying. Now, you got to remember that if it's hitting you that hard, it's probably just a point, and it's probably being taken out of context. While it is true, the context is much bigger than that. It's a lot more complicated than that. And quite frankly, it's probably boring. It's probably, you know, it's a really big deal to that troll because that troll has a very limited, you know, scope and scale of what it pays attention to. But if you look at your whole life altogether, what part of that is your life, right? If you add the whole context, it's like, okay, just try and, we call it scope and scale in our head. You know, it's like, if you're really tinily focused, laser point focused, then everything you see is going to be a really big deal. But if you relax a little bit and broaden your scope and scale, like focusing a camera, you know, if you're going to focus like long distance, like looking at a bird way across a field, you have to, you know, narrow your focus down to just being able to see that bird. But if you want to look at the whole sky, you've got to lay back and widen your view. And once you can see the whole thing, you realize that that one little point is absolutely there, and it's absolutely valid, and it absolutely is making all of the noise that it's making, or they are making, because if we're talking about a headmate or another person, they are a they, right? And we have trouble with it language sometimes, which is our biggest problem with parts talk. But whatever impact is happening, it's real. But are we taking a pinpoint and making it your sky, right? It's like, can we pull back? Is it possible to pull back to putting this all into perspective, you know? Because it's really hard sometimes, especially when we're talking about self-concepts, because like some of our headmates know that they are a teeny tiny part of our life. because there's so many of us, you can't be anything but a teeny tiny part of our life sometimes, which means you have to join teams and you have to be part of something that's happening rather than be important in and of yourself. Which, there's a grief in that too, because all of our self-concept stuff is being measured against like an American standard of have the capacity to be a superhero. Like if every single headmate of mine thought that they were an individual superhero, I can't imagine what kind of chaos we would live in.
The Marvel multi unfiltered universe.
Oh, we hurt just trying to think about it. Everyone's yelling now. Oh God. No, it's okay. It just it means we might have summoned somebody, but that's okay. If they come up, they can talk, If they got something big to say, hey, we're trying to leave more space for that. But, that's kind of how we take all these plural concepts and how our self-concept is, how we're understanding it. But the lessons we learn, we're finding are very applicable in embodied relationships, right? It's like the other embodied, people we know in our life.
But we were laughing. We had to really suppress our laughs before when you were talking about the perspective thing, like the small thing compared to the sky stuff. So this is Matt talking again.
Yeah.
We had to laugh so much because this is like exactly what happens to us a lot, especially to me and Will.
Yeah.
Because wait, I think he wanted to talk about this. Wait. So yeah, so this Will. I said
Hi, Will.
I wasn't really gone. I was just I'm taking the microphone,
Yes.
And I'm confused.
It's okay.
Because Matt is also still around and I'm like, okay, focus. So because I was saying that I'm kind of the quote unquote inner critic, right? And I also said this before, that our advantage as plural system is that we have perspective, because whenever I think something, whenever I feel something, there's also Matt right next to me, feeling something, thinking something, almost always at the same time. So I don't even get the chance to focus on my shit, It's like there's always this other guy who has a completely different perspective, who sees me from the outside, who sees my feelings from his perspective, and like when I have this, when you're talking about the camera lens, right? I have this macro scale, or micro scale, the one lens that you use for very small, detailed shots. I have that lens usually on my camera, and Matt is like this big landscape thinker,
Yep, that's what we were gonna say, is like you're detail oriented and he's big picture, and the perspective you gain from being able to communicate with one another is so much more rich than if you were just being focused in the center.
So it's like whenever I'm like too caught up in my thoughts, he's like chilling next to me, like really in his armchair, and be like, dude, chillax. And he's like telling me how things look from his perspective, or like he's not actively telling me. I mean, sometimes he says something to interrupt my train of thought, but usually it's the feelings I just get sent over without consent, usually. It's just, we can't help it.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Co-conscious, so, right? We just share our feelings. So, yeah, I don't even get the chance to get caught up in negative thought spirals. I mean, I do, but they don't last very long because I always get interrupted. Which, I don't know, when I talk about it right now, it sounds actually great, It sounds like the best experience ever. And in a way, it is great. but it has some negative parts, you know. So for example, the non-consensual thing. But I think that's a whole different topic, going more into plural communication, but or system communication. But it was just, yeah. When you said often that tiny dot is the context of it is quite boring, but that would be like something typical that Matt would just tell me or send me. Not in a devaluing sense, but just like being like, "Hey, are you sure about this?" You know, like reminding me that there's more to life than whatever I'm dealing with in the moment. You know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We feel that so hard. And yeah, if our son had felt, put out by any of that, we wouldn't be repeating the story, but no, he found that very helpful, where it wasn't invalidating. It was, trying to gently add allowance for context while not invalidating feelings. Because it feels really big in that pinpoint, but it doesn't necessarily have to feel really big when you look at the whole life. Yeah. Ugh. But oh, okay, yeah. We were trying to say we were worried that that whole thing had distracted from the selves concept thing, but it doesn't. It's just that yeah, we all have a different scope and scale that is our home. And, that's part of how we experience the self concept differences between headmates and stuff is like we have some headmates whose scope and scale has a really hard time relating to a single life, right? They think about our life as the portion of the culture that we live in or the whole territory that we defend or embody or whatever, and then we have like celestial beings who are really thinking about things on a much grander scope and scale, like the movements of the planets and the rotations of the galaxies. And, from that perspective, oh, geez, okay. Pax is around now because of that. Which is so funny,
I
she identifies things. I don't know if she'll actually talk, but she's so much closer to the front right now. And for our audience, I'll explain. Pax is a celestial being in our system who generally refers to herself as an angel. She used to call herself Angel in general. She's not the only angel we have, so but she really, is practicing being closer to the front and experiencing human embodiment, but she had to like kind of create a human avatar size version of herself that she kind of transforms into to do that fronting. She has to do some transition stuff because perception of reality when you float among galaxies and when you're bigger than the planet itself is very different than being, trying to conceptualize being embodied. And when she does that work, she carries a lot of the peace that exists in the openness and just acceptance of everything kind of is what it is, and whatever we do, you know it's not to duh. We're having a hard time because we know that what she wants to say is really hard for people to hear. It's like what we do on a planetary level doesn't really change anything. Like no matter what we do, at some point the earth will no longer exist, right? Eventually everything we will have ever done will have disappeared, and she's okay with that. She's some other of my headmates are not, and it leads to a lot of conflict around those kind of things. But what she does offer us when she comes down to hang out with us is the peace of just accepting that everything that we grow and that we are is beautiful. It's something that didn't exist without our efforts. It's something that only we can bring to the world. And that's every headmate in my system, every headmate in every system, every embodied person on the planet, every cell that grows, everything that moves. ev- every influence you have on space and time, it's, it needed you to do that. And she just thinks that that's because she kind of reminds, if I know you guys haven't seen Steven Universe, but she kind of reminds us of Rose Quartz in some ways. Just very, oh, not really recognizing the impact of being embodied and about how people can really be harmed by carelessness and, it's like, it's great to think that everything is beautiful. It's like we love Pax and we love what she brings and we love how peaceful it feels when she's around. I'm like, right now, I'm like, she's like anti-anxiety, but she also makes us lose some perspective. Like, our anxious headmates are anxious for real reasons. They are trying to protect us from things that actually have happened to us or mistakes that we are prone to making. And if we forget, we're going to do it again. And we would rather be like reliable people in our body, not not completely loose cannons all the time. So, we know that we're collectively, we do not want to become packs. We are not all trying to fuse into being this angel embodied, right? No, we love having her around. We're so grateful that she's here. We love the perspective that she brings to us. But oh yeah, and I'm like, it's so funny. The experience of her is almost like being high. We are just floating right now, and it's just like, oh wow, we're trying to ground a little bit and stay in the conversation, but she just will float off sometimes because she doesn't lose the ability to fly. It's like, and we talk about that too. It's like it's just mental flying. We don't think that we're floating up off our chair,
Mm.
anything like that, for people who don't understand that that's what it's like. Like, no, it's just our whole body feels lighter
Mm.
and our mood feels lighter. And we physically wear the body lighter. We still feel the whole body, but it doesn't feel as heavy as it did a little bit ago because she's here.
Actually, the way you talk about Parks, feels very similar to how Yuri feels to us in the system.
Mm.
Though she's more human. She's like very pure form of human, like kind of like she sees herself as a human animal, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
part of the animal kingdom in that way. Um,
Oh, wow.
but she also has this very deep um, peaceful perspective on humans, humanity, and life, nature, and the universe. Like what you described, like um, this kind of reassuring fact that, well, in my words, nothing matters, but in her words, more like an awe-inspiring feeling. And yeah, when she's around, she totally carries that across the system. And it's nice. It's a nice to have, But as you also said, I don't want to be like that.
Right.
I don't want to be like Yuri. And this is where discovering our plurality and like distinguishing ourselves was so crucial and important, because she used to be more at the front in the past, together with Matt, and kind of my opinion or my feelings got kind of not ignored, but they were just naturally quieter and not so present. And like we couldn't really conceptualize ourselves as a singular being with all these feelings together, because in Yuri's world this doesn't make sense. How I feel, I mean, it does make sense to her, but it's not how she feels.
Yeah.
But it's still there, right? And we need to like have some sort of concept or language to talk and even think about it or feel it in all the ways that we do.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, we were, as you guys were talking, the reason we brought up Pax and why Pax is here is because it's like, the balance between the trolls and Pax is kind of like a Matt figure. And I think we have a few people in our system that are kind of like that are um, more human life centered, um, but chill at the same time. But, for us, they're the headmates that often make irresponsible decisions. It's hard for them to be good family members and to hold up all the responsibilities that we have as a single parent. So they don't get as much say in how the life goes as they would like in some ways. Um, let's see. But also, Pax is a good example of one of the points here that we are in our notes here that we were trying to make. It's like we're going to start with point 3 here. Um, and yeah, well, I don't know if we need to set anybody up for conflict, but we feel arguments within our system about this. So, we're prepared for arguments from outside our system about this. But when we think about self states and trying to identify self states, all those points are very real, but we don't think of them as static. Like, we have troubles having conversations even sometimes with people who hold their identities so hard and fast that there's no room for nuance or growth in them. Let's see, what did we actually write down? We wrote that stealth states, these points of resonance in the body, life, headspace dimensions, consistently exist and are very real, but they are not static. They can change, grow, evolve as they spend time as themselves. And we find this process beautiful. We find it the essential peace and love in our system. Creating time and space for each other to grow into who we want to be and maybe better who we are rather than why we were initiated, born, split, etc. And rather we are not too caught up in our headmates always being who they first represented themselves as their first learning expression. Or, as they grow, we expect everybody to grow and change. Like, Pax is very different from who she was a year ago. Like, she's a lot more comfortable being human-sized and kind of human-shaped. Because she couldn't even come close. She could front now occasionally, and she couldn't do that before. If she tried, it was just painful, trying to shove her humongous existence into our little body. Just didn't work. It didn't fit, and it was not fun. But now she has access to that. So it's like, we recognize that just because this is, no matter how really strongly anybody in our system feels about who they are right now, we all have the capacity to grow and to change. And so, we have trouble with identity labels being applied to people for life, if that makes sense.
Speaking of conflict,
Uh-huh.
When I read that in your notes, you sent us some of your notes, and when I read, you might be ever changing and undefinable, and that's beautiful. My first reaction, like, this is Will speaking. My first reaction was like, ugh, it's so exhausting.
Oh, I'm not claiming that it isn't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was loud.
But it's like, that was like the point where I'm like, okay, we have, like, within our system, we have completely different opinions on that. Matt had a different opinion on it, and Yori totally agrees with what you just said. And I didn't want to rain on that. So
like we said, it's divisive.
Yeah, right. But I think Matt had something to say about this. Let's see if I can lure him out. Because now we're sitting down, because we have been talking for almost 2 hours. But, okay. So yeah, this is Matt, or tried to be. So what I wrote down in my notes is that I don't actually feel like I change ever. Like, I feel like I'm always me, myself, and I, and it's like I feel very consistent in who I am, not just in the moment. Like I have a very clear self-concept or a sense of self, I would say, but also over time when I look back in my own memories, I'm like I was always this self, and I don't really change. Like the outside changes and the way I have to respond, or I may learn new skills and stuff and get more insights, knowledge and stuff. That changes, but I don't feel like I change. Like my sense of self doesn't change. I don't know if this makes sense, but and this is again the advantage, right? Like I know how my sense of self feels, and I know how Will's sense of self feels, and his is so much more fluid or undefinable than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, yeah, it's just what came up to my mind when I was reading your notes about you maybe ever changing. Where I'm like, do I do I change? No, I don't think so. But I totally get, of course, what you mean by that. Like collectively we are a mess.
Well, yeah, and as you say that, it's like, um, we're trying to, yeah, we are of many minds about that too. And,
Yeah, we thought so.
well, of course. And the ones who can write things down feel them very strongly, but it doesn't mean the rest of us all do. And what we hear what you're saying too. It's like some of us are like, well, yeah, I've kind of that's how I recognize myself through time, is that if I had changed, would I still recognize myself when I'm looking back through the memory, and going, well, who was that? Who is that doing that? And it's like, what is consistent about me that I can recognize myself in collective memory? And so there has to be something, right? And we talk about these things not necessarily to find, quote unquote, the answer, but more to find more and more points of understanding. So, like, we can use everything that doesn't resonate as a point to talk about how, that doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that point. It just means that it's not one that I embrace. Because it's so funny because it's like embodied, that's my point, but it's not necessarily all of my point, because there's a lot of me. Yes, thank you for doing counterpoint on that, because we do want to recognize that kind of counterpoint, because there's more to that too for us to explore. Because excuse us. Oh, that throat clearing, that's somebody specific. Sorry, we're trying to give them space to be here a little more. Okay, yeah, we're gonna clear our throat a lot because they like have a permanent like itch in the throat, and so yeah.
Yeah, we get that when we talk a lot, especially when we laugh a lot.
Well, this is a specific headmate though. They always have an itch in their throat. It's kind of their defining feature. It's bizarre in a way, but yeah.
Probably not to them.
Well, they're afraid to let it go because then they're afraid they won't recognize themselves anymore, which leads back to the very same territory. It's like, what part of yourself do you have to hold on to before you lose your self-concept? And when we are so nuanced and ever changing in system construction and relationship structure, right? It can be really hard to deal with a lot of the things that play into self-concept as being reflected back as human embodiment versus just being a headmate. There's a lot of expectations for being a person, a human person, that you don't have to have being a headmate.
Oh yeah, that's so true.
You know, like I don't have a throat in the body, right? I don't have to hold my body in any one way to be able to talk. I can just think it and think it with the intention of expressing it outside my thought bubble, because it's like I don't know about you guys, but we have passive influence of talking in the head that's different than thinking in the head. And like some of my headmates have a relationship with me where they can passively influence feel me thinking, but they don't necessarily. Talking is still choice, even in the headspace. So it's kind of interesting because we're still being careful about word choice even on our thought talk, which is a layer that I don't think most people have to do. But we kind of do, because anything we practice saying in the headspace we know is going to be closer to something we say in the front, and we want to be really conscientious about the language that we use, even in our headspace, because we don't know there's a lot of language that we had to outgrow. It's like when your body is as old as ours is, polite language itself has evolved quite a bit from when we were learning to talk.
Mm.
I'm thinking mostly of slurs. Like if you grew up with people saying slurs in your household, or things that didn't used to be slurs but are now, if you have older headmates or people who haven't been around in a long time, the way they would have said something um, isn't acceptable to say anymore. So we'd have to, rather than, if we just regularly pay close attention to how we talk, that doesn't make it out of our mouth anymore.
Mm.
But anyway, that's just a rudimentary example of that kind of thing. But it's like, it is exhausting trying to hold these layers of existence simultaneously, and we generally do it a lot more effortlessly, but we're trying to actually front a little differently right now, and a little bit more intentionally right now, rather than in a blended bigger team.
Mm. Yeah, what you just said, like some of your headmates are quote unquote older in the sense that they have been around, or they have fronted a long time ago. And basically all the time that they didn't front or weren't close to the front, they basically have to grow up or learn, getting accustomed to new culture around them so quickly. And that's exhausting, right? And it's a bit like, this is also like tying it into self-concepts, is like sometimes your self-concept is also defined by your culture, right? The culture that you grew up in. And when that just suddenly changes because you haven't been around for a while, then I think I can imagine this is tough, and I think that's a very common experience for many plurals, especially for plurals who also deal with amnesia gaps and like,
oh yeah,
front, like really being dormant from the front, and not really, experiencing life in all that time.
yeah. And it's, for us, we have, I don't know, if we experience amnesia, we do so differently. Like maybe we compartmentalize it into emotional layers rather than, cognitive layers where we use vocal communication. We're not sure, but we know there is adaptations that need. Oh, goodbye. I hate to call them sore throat, but it kind of would, because they don't hurt when they have that throat thing, but they absolutely do.
In German, we say having a frog in your throat.
Oh, yeah, and they might actually be a frog now that you mention it. We do have a lot of animals.
You're welcome.
In our system. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we wish we weren't so susceptible to that, but with the self-concept stuff. Oh no, it's not. Don't apologize at all. The only way we get stronger is via practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's, the thing is when your self-concept is not tied into any sort of physical reality, you can decide that a different form works for you much better than the one that you had before, like trying on a new coat in some ways. And, in our system, headmates are absolutely allowed to do that. There are, consequences to manifesting things in the physical expression of our life through the body, but in their personal way that they feel about themselves, you know, everybody's kind of allowed to be sort of a shapeshifter inside the headspace. It's like it's their self concept. They get to play with it and discover that, oh, well, that really did work for me until I found this other thing. Yes, until you found this other thing. Because, we only try on the wardrobe in front of us, right? Like you were talking about, your culture is a limiting factor. You're only going to see the realm of possibilities that exist easily extraplicable. you know, like you jump out by your imagination from what you've been exposed to, right?
Yeah.
And the more you've been exposed to, the more expansive your imagination can be about stuff. And I'm not trying to call my headmates imaginary. I'm just saying that how they play with their self concept and how they see themselves starts with imagining possibilities and seeing how they feel.
Oh, this brings me to something that we noted down. I think this came from all of us collectively, is that plurality to us means freedom because it encompasses infinite possibilities. It's like it's a label in a way that has only one condition, and that's like being more than one self-aware entity in a physical body. And that doesn't exclude singlethood as a concept, and it doesn't invalidate the existence, for example, of clinical diagnoses such as DID. And it also doesn't neglect any form of suffering. And it doesn't ignore research on self and selves-concept. Is more like the opposite, that research neglects the existence of plurality.
Mm-hmm.
And plurality is just being so so vague about its definition. It's so inclusive of any sort of subjective experience of consciousness or self. So we really love that about the umbrella term plurality, because anything is possible, anything goes, everything's allowed, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do too. And, we really enjoy the Plural Association for the way it expresses and holds space for community, where your self concepts and your plurality are not up for question, and the umbrella has room for all of us, no matter how many or few headmates we have, or um, the origin stories of any of us. No matter what our doctors might say, or our families might say, or any of that normal limiting factor. It's like that's as just thinking about the larger singlet stuff when usually teenage kids are doing all that self exploration stuff and deciding what parts of the culture they were raised in they want to embrace and which parts they want to rebel against. Um, you know, the family umbrella you'd hope would have space for all of that, in a healthy relationship that exists, right? Um, it's not one that everyone is privileged enough to experience. It's like we weren't even brave enough to really explore a lot of things as a kid. We were struggling so much with how to cope with what we understand now was plurality, but back then it wasn't allowed, so we were trying to do all we could to survive. It's hard for us to remember back then, it's like now looking back we're like, oh gosh, we can see a lot of evidence of probable amnesia from then, which if you have a really good memory for details but you get everything out of order, that can be really hard for people to accept or understand it, especially when everything you do when you're a teenager is framed as rebellion, if it doesn't immediately seem like compliance. So, blah. Teenagerhood's hard enough, but being a teenager and being plural is ugh. I mean, and I don't mean to ugh as in there's anything wrong with my teenage headmates or there was anything wrong with us being a teenager. It's just we were left alone in our experience without any support.
Mm. And still are, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, I mean, we have the plural community, but who else is there who can guide us except ourselves?
Yeah. Yes, we don't have, you know, plural elders talking about how it's been done so much. I mean, we do have some, not to be rude to people who've been doing this for a really, really long time. But in our individual circumstances, yeah, it's not like it's such a common thing that our family members get support for how to support us in our plurality, right?
Mm.
Not much. That's a someday thing that we might get.
Yes.
And hopefully it won't be all medicalized, but I'm sure most of it will be. Where they're like, this is what the doctors recommend that you do for your adult child who's a system. And we're like, well, how trauma informed is your information? But anyway, that's totally different than self-concept stuff. Well, I mean, it's all ties into self-concept stuff, but
yeah. I guess that's why we made this episode at the very beginning, and we're making it a 2-part episode because we have so much to say, and we're again looking at the time, and there's already part 2 of Selves-Concepts. We still have some stuff on our list.
Oh, well, we would love to hear it.
But we feel like we should maybe wrap it up at some point. Okay. Unfortunately, the thing about podcasts is they need to end at some point.
They do. They do. Okay.
But are there like any final thoughts you would like to put out there in this episode?
It's just a reminder that like you exist whether or not you mean to. And let's see. That's just the yous we find ourselves are beautiful, right? This is our existence is not here to like do things to people. We're not existing to be a problem or to create problems or any of that. And when you're sitting in your self-concept and realizing that you exist even if you didn't, you didn't choose to. It's just, yeah, you might have made choices about how you're going to wear this existence you find yourself with. But it's just something that, boom, there. I have a self-concept. Wow.
Ta-da.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, and I don't think blame, the concept of blame has any part in that, even if you were your headmate was created via something terrible happening to you, your body or your system. That headmate that is created, it is not their fault. There's no room for blame among headmates about that kind of thing, right? Gosh, that's not quite what I meant with all this. It's like worrying about who should exist or why you exist or any of that can matter if it matters to you, but it doesn't have to. And it's just ownership of your self-concept is a good thing. And gosh, it's just I wrote out a whole paragraph that I don't know that I feel the same way about the words in those order.
Take your time to recollect your thoughts if you need to.
Okay. It's just more the original point we had is like, you exist anyway. The work of getting to know yourselves better is incredibly valuable work. That's really the take home for the whole thing. It's just, it's, you already exist. So let's make the most of it. Let's try and be not some sort of best self, but maybe a bit more comfortable self, a bit more um, able to center yourself in a peace so you can work from that space and recenter back in a peaceful self. That's we work towards that goal with pretty much all our headmates. Everyone will let us anyway.
I'm also looking at our notes. Will had a lot more to say about this, but one thing that sticks out to me that fits really well in there is that getting to know yourself helps getting to know your needs and figuring out how to meet them and how to just feel more comfortable with your existence. And
Yeah.
I love existence.
And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And, and all of our headmates might feel different about all of that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We encompass a lot happening all simultaneously. But yeah, we're trying to get, if we're uncomfortable, we don't want to sentence anybody in the system to staying that way, is basically the take home there. If we work together, I bet you we can find an easier way to carry what we have to carry.
Yeah, like that's what I would say is like those who are more comfortable can help out the others, and at least that's how we work. It's like I try my best to help my headmates to feel more comfortable in life. Try to spread that sentiment without devaluing their feelings or without devouring their feelings. Like
oh geez, and what a balance that is.
keep my feelings to myself, but also like kind of letting it sweep through and allowing my handmaids to decide whether they want to accept it or not, and when they want to accept it and when they don't want to hear shit from me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to talk about self-concepts, even if we rambled a lot.
Yeah, but that's how it goes. That's why we do this Plural Conversations podcast thingy here, right?
Well, we're still getting our feet wet, so
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that idiom.
I think we made it up, so I don't know that it's really true.
It sounds like getting cold feet.
No, but we didn't mean it like that. What we meant was we're not quite swimming freely in the water. We're just starting to test it out.
Yes. I mean, we don't really have any Plural Conversations podcast as an example in that form, so yeah, we're trailblazing our path through the unknown.
Yeah. Well, we hope to hear many more. So thanks everybody for listening. We're the Unfiltered Universe, and this is Headmates for Life, Plural Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you also from us. This is Matt from The Voices of Jarvis, and also my headmates were around, Will and Yuri. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody, everyone.
Yeah.
And looking forward to many more episodes.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye. We do the synchronization again, okay?
Of
so
course.
Count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Clap, clap, clap.
Good.